I had suffered from depression since my early 20s. I had taken at least a half a dozen medications that had worked to varying degrees. Prozac, Wellbutrin, Trintellix. They kept me functional, but they never brought me back to my old self. In 2016, they stopped working. I went back to my psychiatrist, and he tried me on several additional medications. Each one had a trial period of 4 to 6 weeks before I knew whether they were effective. When you're severely depressed, this can be an eternity. Each medication would bring its own set of side effects, making the process feel endless and intolerable. 4 to 6 weeks, trial after trial. Bedridden, not able to get up for more than 1 to 2 hours in a day before I would need to or want to go back to sleep, day after day. Trying to run a business that if people knew my mental state would surely have some level of compassion, but would also likely not want to continue to do business with someone who could find themselves in a psychiatric unit at any moment. The pressure of these realities was overwhelming. I would go to bed at night and wish I was somebody else in the morning. People go to sleep to expect to wake up feeling refreshed in the morning. I can only describe my sleeping habit as living in a bed tomb. No deep rest. My brain always on high alert. This couldn't continue. If I didn't figure something out, I knew I wasn't going to make it. People don't always understand suicidality. For me, I didn't want to die. I just knew I couldn't go on living like this indefinitely. Where was the solution? It had to exist. It certainly did not exist in our current health system. A person who wants to die would not have been so diligent in trying to find their own solution, but that's exactly what I did. Hours upon hours researching, looking for the possible solutions, from the scientific to the absurd. I couldn't discount any of them. I couldn't afford to. From wormwood elixir, which promised to flush out all of my body's parasites, to vitamin therapy, which promised to replete my depleted vitamin D, B, and folic acids, which were certainly low, to ECT, considered the gold standard for depression at the time, shocking me back into wellness, to TMS, which promised to untangle the brain regions that were stuck in depression through magnetic pulses. All of these treatments may have worked for some. They didn't work for me. I came by ketamine by watching videos of patients who were going to the States for this new treatment, watching the severity of their depression before their treatment and then watching it dissolve over the course of 40-minute infusions was truly striking. These were people like me, seemingly at the end, desperate and in despair, and in need of something that truly worked. In 40 minutes, the smiles returned to their faces. In 40 minutes, you could see their relief. It looked like a miracle to me. I had been in the depths of despair and anguish for close to a year at this point. How could this exist? And I didn't know. My doctors hadn't told me. It seemed criminal. Before I could declare this legitimate option, I needed to do my research. I had been sucked into other therapies only to have them let me down. I couldn't emotionally afford to do this at this time. What I learned is that ketamine works on a unique and different neurotransmitter pathway than other treatments on the market. While there were a large variety of other treatments available, they were all working on similar pathways: dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. Ketamine, on the other hand, was working on the neurotransmitter pathway, glutamate. Glutamate is the most abundant excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain. Think of glutamate as the network that connects all parts of the brain to one another, a neural net of sorts. Glutamate is found in 85% of the brain cells. In depression, with ongoing stress and a sense of hopelessness, the brain can become damaged and lose its ability to connect to this neural network. Current research has proven that chronic depression causes branch-like structures in neurons called dendrites to shrink. This makes it more difficult, if not impossible, for the brain to communicate with other key areas, resulting in certain areas of the brain being left quiet and asleep. specifically the prefrontal cortex, which is related to critical thinking, learning, and decision-making, is impaired. Not only are we depressed, but our ability to think our way out of it is impaired. It's a significant double blow. In here lies the miracle of ketamine. Ketamine has the ability to regrow these neural dendrites. Think of the branches on a tree thickening and reaching out to other branches, reconnecting the brain. This process, called BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor, is happening within hours of the infusion, not weeks to months like other traditional antidepressants. After concluding my research, I decided to get the treatment. We didn't have this in Canada at the time. There were a few clinical studies, but they were next to impossible to get into. I found a clinic that had been providing IV ketamine infusions for over 5 years in New York. How could it be there for so long and we didn't have it? No matter. At this point, I needed to go where it was. I would have gone to Mars. The choice was simple. Traveling with my mom, we arrived in New York, sitting nervously in a doctor's office. The time had come. There was a sense of relief, but also a lot of anxiety. There was a lot resting on the success of this treatment. The IV was placed in my arm. I sat back, I put on my headphones, I tried to relax. I could feel it coming over me, slowly up my arms and legs, and then into my head. It felt as if every cell in my body and brain was being taken over by this calm. Suddenly, all I could feel was the ketamine. I could feel my emotions come up and then recede. There were points that were intense, but it also felt like my brain was opening. It could think deeply for the first time without the pain, without depression. The pain and depression had been cut off. It literally stopped. I had been feeling it constantly for the past year, and it was gone. It allowed me to focus and think about other things. I remember describing to the nurse a vision I saw during the infusion. It felt like I had 5 fingers, 4 of which were open and 1 of which was closed and seemingly broken. I described the feeling of seeing that broken finger open up during the infusion. It represented all that was broken, depressed, and anxious in my life. I could literally visualize it being repaired. It was such an inspirational vision. I could feel my brain starting to click again at its normal rate. As I came out of the infusion, I needed to gather myself for what I had just experienced. It had been a very long day. My mother and I would take the train back to our Airbnb in Brooklyn, stopping off for a bite to eat. Then came a moment that I will never forget. As we were walking, I stopped and looked at my mom. "It's gone," I said. "It's gone." The feeling, the psychic pain in my head, the heaviness, the aches in my body, the stress, the constant stress that had plagued me, pain and anxiety that would not allow me to sleep at the end of days, even though I was exhausted, the endless hopelessness, the uncertainty that it would never be resolved, it was gone. In less than 2 hours after leaving the clinic, it was gone. Depression can make you feel like you're stuck in the mud. It can make critical thinking near impossible. For me, all my brain power was focused on how to get out of this seemingly endless pit. My body constantly ached. My brain constantly felt like it was heavy and on fire. It was a constant state of stress and inflammation. What I started to notice after the infusion was that the feeling of stress and inflammation dissolved, literally disappearing. For the first time in a long time, I could use my brain to focus on other things. Some people describe the rigid thinking of depression to the well-worn grooves of a ski slope that you've ridden exactly the same way 100 times before. The grooves are deep and well-worn. With ketamine, it felt like there was a fresh layer of deep powdered snow. I could ski wherever I wanted. My thoughts were no longer stuck. This movement, this possibility of new movement, was critical in changing my outlook, my life. Now that movement and change were possible. I now remember a feeling of wellness that I had not felt in so long. It reminded my brain of the memories and experience of wellness. and the possibility that wellness existed, and it existed for me. A healthy life was possible. Rekindling friendships and developing intimate relationships was possible. Building businesses was possible. I genuinely had hope.